The crosshairs settled on the back of Sergeant Daniel Reyes' skull before he ever heard the shot. One pull, one breath, one American life snuffed out like a candle in the wind, and the man behind the rifle didn't even blink. He just cycled, the bolt exhaled slowly, and whispered something in Pashto that no one alive would ever translate. They called him Ghost, and Ghost didn't miss. He didn't hesitate. He didn't feel. He simply selected his next target and waited because, in this part of Afghanistan, patience was the deadliest weapon of all, and Ghost had been waiting for SEAL Team 6 for a very long time. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Kira Vaughn had small hands. That was the first thing most people noticed about her. Small hands, quiet voice, and a way of moving through a room like she was trying not to disturb the air. At 22 years old, she was the youngest person attached to SEAL Team 6's forward element at FOB Kestrel, a forward operating base so dusty and loud and raw that it felt less like a military installation and more like the edge of the world, the last place civilization decided it wanted anything to do with. She was a combat medic. That was her title, her function, her lane, and most of the men around her made sure she stayed in it. "Doc, you got more saline in that kit?" That was usually how conversations started with her. Not her name, not Kira, just Doc. Like she was a piece of equipment that happened to breathe. "2 bags, she'd say, no extra words. "Good, keep up." And she would, she always did. Nobody asked her opinion on routes. Nobody handed her a weapon brief. Nobody pulled her into the tactical circles where the big decisions got made over laminated maps and red string timelines. She absorbed it all anyway, the patterns, the habits, the rhythms of the team, the way a person absorbs rain. Quietly, completely, without anyone noticing. Marcus Chung noticed, though. Marcus was SEAL Team 6's long-range specialist, the team's designated marksman, and the best shot any of them had ever seen in the field. He was 34 years old with a jaw like carved oak and eyes that never seemed to fully relax even when he laughed, which wasn't often. He'd served 3 deployments before this one and had a reputation that preceded him by about 6 time zones. He also noticed things other people didn't bother to notice. "You've been watching me zero the Barrett," he said one afternoon, not looking up from the rifle he was cleaning. Kira didn't flinch. "It's a Barrett M82, 50 caliber. You set your dope at 800 meters, and you've been compensating for a consistent left wind push. You drop the turret, 2 clicks, your cold bore shot runs true." The silence that followed was long enough to be a sentence all by itself. Marcus finally looked up. He studied her face the way he studied terrain, methodically, without expression, looking for things that weren't obvious at first glance. "Where'd you learn that?" "My grandfather. She picked up a roll of trauma tape without missing a beat. He started teaching me when I was 9. "What was he? Force Recon, 2 tours, Vietnam." Marcus set the cleaning rod down slowly. "And nobody here knows that." It wasn't a question. Kira met his eyes and gave him the smallest, most level look he'd probably ever received from someone half his age. Nobody asked. Marcus looked at her for another long moment. Then he went back to cleaning his rifle. But from that day forward, he didn't stop her when she watched. That was 3 months ago. Now it was November 15th, and the whole base felt wrong. Kira noticed it the way she noticed everything without announcing it. The morning briefing had a different texture to it. The senior operators came out of the TOC with their jaws set and their eyes hard and moving. Lieutenant Dawson, who ran their element, had the particular stillness of a man who'd just been handed information he didn't fully want to have. She was repacking a trauma kit near the vehicle line when she caught fragments. "Route clearance. Northern corridor. Intelligence reliable," they said. Though she'd been around long enough to know, reliable was a word commanders used when they meant, "We're committing anyway." And then she heard a name. Ghost. Just once, spoken in a low voice between Dawson and the team's intel sergeant. But once was enough. She'd heard that name before. Everyone at FOB Kestrel had. Ghost was the enemy sniper who'd been operating in the northern Kunar province for the better part of 8 months. He didn't use the same hide twice. He didn't engage in patterns. He selected his targets with what seemed like almost personal deliberation. Team leaders, experienced operators, anyone who carried the specific kind of authority that, when removed, caused the most collapse. He was patient. He was precise. And he had already killed 4 coalition soldiers in the past 12 weeks. Kira zipped her kit closed and said nothing. The convoy rolled out at 0630, 3 vehicles, 2 MRAPs and a JLTV. Kira rode in the middle vehicle wedged between Corman Torres and a big quiet operator named Briggs, who slept through the first 20 minutes of the drive with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to rest in any available window of time. Marcus was in the lead MRAP, positioned to access the roof hatch for overwatch. Dawson was in the third vehicle running rear security and command. The radio traffic was normal for the first 40 minutes. Call-outs, routine, the crackle of checkpoints, nothing that made Kira's hands stop moving through her kit rehearsing placements she'd rehearsed 100 times before. Then Torres shifted beside her. You ever get the feeling a mission's already decided before it happens? What do you mean? Like he searched for words, like the outcome's already locked in somewhere, and you're just catching up to it. Kira looked at him. Torres was a good medic, a decent man, 26 years old with a newborn daughter back in San Diego. He showed photos of every chance he got. She could see something working behind his eyes that he didn't have a clinical name for. Instinct, the body's earliest warning system. Keep your tourniquet accessible, she said quietly. Torres blinked, reached down without thinking, and moved the tourniquet from his cargo pocket to his front left chest pocket, where he could reach it one-handed. He didn't ask why. He just did it. Briggs opened one eye, said nothing, closed it again. The convoy had just passed a dried riverbed crossing when the radio changed. Contact front. The transmission broke up, static, then mover, then the world tore open. The lead MRAP disappeared into a wall of fire and pressure that Kira felt in her back teeth before she heard it with her ears. The concussion wave hit the middle vehicle hard enough to slam everyone sideways, and then they were stopped. Engine-killed driver stunned and outside through the small armored windows. Kira could see nothing but smoke and debris and the orange haze of burning metal. Torres was already shouting something. Briggs was up, weapon in his hands. The driver, Petty Officer Crane, was shaking his head like a man trying to clear water from his ears. We're hit, Crane said. Are we? We're not hit, Kira said, and her voice was flat and functional and completely outside the chaos. The lead vehicle took the blast. Get eyes on casualties now. She didn't wait for confirmation. She pushed her door open. The air outside was thick with particulate and the acrid smell of burning fuel and something organic and terrible underneath it that her training recognized before her conscious mind did. She moved toward the lead MRAP without running because running was how you got shot in the open. But she moved fast, crouched angled, reading the terrain through the smoke even as her hands were already reaching into her kit. Talk to me, she shouted toward the lead vehicle. Who's ambulatory? Who's down? A figure emerged from the smoke. Sergeant Holt. His face was streaked with blood from a deep laceration above his ear, but he was upright and moving. Walsh is out cold. Driver's trapped. Marcus, he stopped. Where is Marcus? Holt pointed upward, toward the roof of the MRAP. MRAP, he was in the hatch, overwatch. Kira was already moving to the side of the vehicle, finding the handholds, pulling herself up before anyone thought to tell her not to. The roof was hot. The hatch was open, and the Barrett M82 was lying on its side at the edge of the roofline barrel, angled out toward the ridge to the north. Marcus Chung was flat on his back, unconscious. She was beside him in 2 seconds, hands on his neck, finding the pulse strong present, and then she was running her fingers along his skull, finding the damage. A groove in the right temporal region. Not a penetrating wound. A graze. High-velocity round, probably M14 equivalent. Ghost used whatever gave him the most reach. It had skimmed Marcus's head at an angle that was by some fraction of probability just wide enough to leave him alive. Another centimeter of variance, and she would have been collecting remains instead of checking a pulse. He's breathing, she called down. Concussion, possible temporal fracture. He needs to stay still. Then who's on overwatch? Holt called up. And that question hung in the air like smoke, because the answer in that moment was no one. Kira looked at the Barrett, then she looked north toward the ridgeline. At a distance, her eyes automatically calculated the way her grandfather had trained her to calculate it, using elevation shadow angle the behavior of the dust that the wind was carrying from left to right. The rifle was loaded. Marcus had chambered a round before the blast. She could hear the firefight intensifying below. Crack of outgoing rounds, someone on the radio screaming coordinates. The distinct distant reports of a precision rifle from the north. 2 shots, different rhythm, from the chaos of the close-range exchange that had Ghost signature all over it. She reached out and laid her hand on the stock of the Barrett M82. Doc. Holt's voice came up from below, sharp, urgent. We need you down here. Torres has Walsh, she said. I checked Torres's training record. He can manage a penetrating abdominal trauma without me for 10 minutes. She kept her hand on the rifle. Who's your best shooter still? Up, silence from below. Holt, who is it? Briggs, Holt admitted. But Briggs is covering the south side and we can't. Then I need you to give me a range card on that northern ridge, and I need it right now. Another silence. Longer. Doc, what the hell are you, Holt? Her voice didn't rise. It never rose. Range card, northern ridge, now. She heard him exhale. Then she heard him start talking. 840 meters to the primary ridgeline. Elevation approximately 60 feet above their position. Wind steady left to right, probably 8 to 10 knots based on the dust behavior. One distinct notch in the rock formation, a natural hide that an intelligent sniper would use because it gave a 70-degree field of fire across the entire corridor they were operating in. Kira pulled the Barrett toward her and settled behind it. Her grandfather used to say that a rifle was just a tool, and a tool didn't care who held it. It only cared whether you understood it, whether you respected what it was capable of, whether you had the discipline to be still at exactly the moment when every nerve in your body was demanding that you move. She found the notch in the ridgeline through the scope. For a moment, there was nothing, just rock and shadow and distance. Then something shifted. Not much. The smallest displacement of light and geometry, a shape that didn't belong to the natural composition of that rock face. It was the thing she'd been trained to look for. The thing Ghost had never expected anyone to find, because Ghost had never expected to be hunted from his own hunting ground. Kira exhaled halfway and stopped. She didn't pull the trigger, not yet, because Ghost was good enough that if she fired and missed, he would move, and she would never find him again. So she waited, the way her grandfather had taught her, the way every long-range shooter learns or doesn't survive long enough to tell the story. Below her, the firefight continued. She could hear it the way you hear a storm from inside a room present, demanding real, but she was somewhere else now. She was in the still place between heartbeats where the world narrowed to a single point. Doc. It was Torres this time, crackling through the radio Torres had dropped on the roof when he'd moved to the casualty. The handset was 2 feet from her knee. Walsh is stable. Where are you? She didn't answer. Ghost moved, just slightly, repositioning, probably because something had told him that animal instinct that keeps top-tier operators alive, that something in his equation had changed. He was shifting to a new angle, and in that shift for exactly 2 seconds, the geometry of his position opened up. Kira was already at the end of her trigger pull. The Barrett fired. The recoil was substantial, always was with a 50 cal, but she'd built the correct shoulder position from muscle memory that was older than her career in the Army, older than her enlistment, older than the first time she'd decided what kind of person she wanted to be. She rode the recoil and got back on scope. The notch in the ridgeline erupted in dust and fragmented rock. And Ghost's next shot, the one that had already been traveling toward her position, missed by 9 feet. The radio exploded. What was that? Who fired? Did someone get on the 50 Northern Ridge? She said into the handset, completely level. Ghost repositioned right after my shot. I hit near, didn't confirm. He'll move again. Stand by. Dead silence on the net. Then Dawson's voice from the third vehicle. Controlled but barely. Who the hell is talking? Right now, Bo. Vaughn, sir. Doc Vaughn. I'm on the Barrett. Another silence. The kind that had texture. Doc, Dawson said carefully, you need to... With respect, Lieutenant, she said, Marcus is down and I have eyes on the shooter's likely secondary position. I need about 90 seconds and I need the net clear. Can you give me that? No one answered, which in its own way was the answer. Kira exhaled and went back to the scope and let the world outside the crosshairs disappear. Because the work wasn't finished yet, and Kira Vaughn had never left a job half done in her life. The 90 seconds she'd asked for felt like 90 years. Kira kept her eye behind the scope, and her breathing measured, and her body absolutely still while the world below her continued to come apart. She could hear Briggs on the south perimeter exchanging fire in short controlled bursts. She could hear Torres talking to Walsh in that low, even medic voice that said everything was not okay, but the patient needed to believe it was. She could hear Dawson on the command net coordinating with the QRF that was supposedly 20 minutes out, which in Afghan mountain terrain meant 40 minutes, and everyone who'd been in country longer than a month knew it. She heard all of it, and she let none of it move her. Ghost's secondary position was 112 meters north-northwest of where he'd been. She knew this not because anyone had told her, but because she'd been studying the ridgeline for the past 4 minutes, and there were only 3 natural hides on that entire rock face that gave a shooter the field of fire he needed. She'd eliminated the first when her round had chewed into the rock beside it. The third was too exposed on the western flank. Ghost wasn't sloppy. That left the second. A deeper notch partially shadowed set back further from the lip than the first. Harder to see, Harder to reach with a round. Better protection. Exactly where a disciplined shooter would go when his first position was compromised. She swung the scope left and found it. Nothing yet. But Ghost was already moving. She could feel it the way her grandfather had always said you could feel a deer before you saw it, a disturbance in the stillness, a wrongness in the pattern. Vaughn, Dawson's voice, still controlled, still professional, but with a new edge underneath it that she recognized as a man deciding something he hadn't fully decided yet. "What's your status?" "Waiting," she said. "Waiting for what?" "For him to make a mistake." Silence. Then, "And if he doesn't?" "He already made one," she said. "He repositioned right after my first shot instead of going cold. That means he's rattled. Rattled shooters move faster than they should." Another silence. Longer. Holt's voice came up from just below the roofline, quieter, meant only for her. "Doc, how many times have you actually done this?" She didn't take her eye from the scope. "Shot at a person. Yeah. Today makes one." She heard Holt's breath catch. She didn't elaborate because there was nothing to elaborate. The number was the number. What mattered was the training behind it, and the training was real, and she was here, and Marcus was unconscious 2 feet away from her, and Ghost was somewhere in that ridgeline deciding his next move. The radio crackled. "Briggs, Southside contact is breaking off. They're pulling back." "Copy," Dawson said. "Northern contact." "Still active," Kira said. "He hasn't fired in 4 minutes. He's either setting up for something deliberate or he's trying to confirm whether I'm still on the gun." "Are you going to be?" "Yes, sir." She heard Dawson exhale. Then, "Holt, get your people consolidated." "Torres status on Walsh." "Stable," Torres called back. "He's coherent. Took some shrapnel in the left thigh, but the bleed's controlled." "And Chung Bot," Kira answered before anyone else could. "Marcus is breathing. Pulse is strong. Hasn't regained consciousness. He needs evac, but he's not dying in the next 40 minutes. She paused. "Which is what matters right now." Nobody argued with that, which was itself a kind of shift, the first small one barely perceptible in how the team was relating to the voice coming from the rooftop. Then Ghost fired. The round came from exactly where she'd calculated the second notch, and it wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at the third vehicle, the JLTV where Dawson was running command, the windshield spiderwebbed. Someone shouted. Dawson's voice disappeared from the net for 3 seconds. That were some of the loudest 3 seconds Kira had experienced in her short life. And then he was back. I'm up. It came through the glass, a breath. Missed me by about 8 inches. 8 inches. Ghost was adjusting. He'd seen that the American sniper position had changed, and he was calculating the new threat landscape. He was smart enough to take out the command element while the sniper was repositioning attention. He was the best enemy shooter any of them had ever faced, but he just revealed his position. Kira was already on it. She'd tracked the muzzle flash through the scope, just a fraction of a second of light and disturbance in the shadow, and she had his geometry now. He was set back about 4 meters from the rock lip elevated angle using the natural crease in the terrain to support his barrel. Smart. Nearly invisible. Nearly. She adjusted her elevation, dialed the windage, let her finger rest against the trigger with the particular kind of patience that didn't feel like waiting at all, felt more like certainty, like the moment before a sentence ends when you already know how it finishes. Vaughn. It was Holt again from below. Urgent now. If you have him, take him. Don't wait. I'm not waiting, she said quietly. I'm being sure. The difference between those two things was everything. Her grandfather had taught her that on a cold Montana morning when she was 11 years old and had rushed a shot and missed a buck at 400 yards and cried about it for an hour. He hadn't consoled her. He'd sat down beside her in the grass and said being fast and being right are not the same thing. And if you confuse them, you'll spend your life cleaning up the mistakes. She was not rushing this shot. She exhaled to the bottom of her breath, held the empty space, and fired. The .50 caliber round covered the distance in just over 1 second. She heard nothing from the ridge. No second shot, no indication of movement, just a complete and absolute stillness that settled over that rock face like a drop curtain. The radio was quiet for a long moment. Then Briggs, Northern contact has stopped. I say again, Northern contact has stopped firing. Dawson Vaughn, do you have a visual? Negative, she said. He's in shadow and I can't confirm from here. But he hasn't moved. He hasn't repositioned. Either I put that round close enough to take him out of the fight or I hit him directly. A beat. Either way, he's done shooting for today. Another silence. And then something happened on that radio net that Kira had not been expecting. Briggs said outstanding. Just that one word. But from Briggs, who she had heard say approximately 40 words total in 3 months, it landed like a speech. Holt climbed up onto the roof. She felt the MRAP shift slightly with his weight. He came up beside her and looked north. Then he looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at her. "You want to tell me," he said slowly, "how a 22-year-old combat medic just did what she just did?" Kira was already breaking down her position carefully properly, the way she'd been taught, clearing the chamber, engaging the safety, leaving the weapon ready for Marcus when Marcus came back to himself. "My grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 9. I was competing in long-range precision events by the time I was 15. I applied for special operations assessment 3 times. The first 2 times I was told the program wasn't open to women in that role. Third time I was told the same thing, so I came in as a medic." Holt stared at her. "And the sniper training, unofficial." She met his eyes. Marcus knew. He let me run range sessions with him when the range was quiet. He said. She stopped, looked at Marcus lying still, chest rising and falling steadily. He said the team deserved to know what their assets were actually capable of. Holt was quiet for a moment. And Dawson didn't know. Lieutenant Dawson knew what my file said. She pulled her trauma kit to her knees and began reassessing Marcus's head wound, her hands moving automatically. My file said combat medic. Holt sat down on the roofline, ran a hand over his face. "Hell, Doc. I need a seat collar and I need someone to stabilize his cervical spine while I fit it. Can you do that?" He could, he did. And while they worked on Marcus together, the firefight below finished dying out the enemy fighters who'd staged the ambush, pulling back into the mountains, as the equation of the battle had clearly and irrevocably shifted. The QRF was 22 minutes out. Walsh was conscious and complaining, which was the best possible sign. Dawson had a cut above his left eye from the glass, but was already back on the command net, as though nothing had happened. And Ghost, whoever he was, wherever exactly that round had found him, was silent. The helicopter came in fast and low, the way they always did in contested areas, not bothering with elegance, just getting boots and blades to where they needed to be and getting out. Kira helped load Marcus onto the litter herself, refusing to step back even when one of the QRF medics moved to take over. She gave the handoff in precise clinical language: GCS score, pupil response, temporal wound description, estimated blood loss. Last vital signs, and she didn't stop talking until the medic nodded and said quietly, "I got him, Doc." She stepped back, watched the bird lift. The rotor wash hit her full in the face and she let it standing in the open while everyone else turned away, and she felt something move through her that she couldn't have named precisely, but that had something to do with the specific ache of caring about someone you aren't supposed to have feelings about, and the specific relief of watching them fly away alive. She turned around and found Dawson standing 4 feet behind her. He looked at her for a long time. His face had that particular quality of a man who is reordering a significant amount of information very quickly and is trying not to show how much work that's taking. "Vaughn," he said. "Sir." "The Barrett." "Sir. You want to explain to me?" He stopped, started again. "You want to explain to me how you knew how to run a Barrett M82 at 840 meters against an enemy precision shooter who had not been successfully engaged in 8 months of operations?" "Yes, sir," she said. "My grandfather." "I read the one-line version from Holt," he said. "I want the full version, from you." So she told him, all of it, the Montana mornings, the competition circuit, the 3 assessments, Marcus, the range sessions, all of it in the same flat factual voice she used to describe wound assessments, because to her it was the same kind of information, relevant, specific, true. Dawson listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet long enough that she started to wonder if she'd miscalculated the conversation. Then he said, "Why didn't you say something?" "No one asked, sir." He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not softened exactly, but recalibrated. "That's going to change." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. On the drive back to FOB Kestrel, nobody talked much. That was normal after contact, the crash of adrenaline leaving a specific kind of silence that everyone in the vehicle recognized. Torres stared at nothing. Briggs was back to his operational default, which appeared to involve sleeping. Crane drove with both hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road with the focused attention of a man who had decided he was going to get them home. Kira sat with her kit in her lap and her hands folded on top of it and thought about her grandfather. He had been a small man. People were always surprised by that force recon, 2 Vietnam tours, the kind of reputation that arrived in a room before he did, and then they'd meet him and find this compact, quiet man with careful eyes and unhurried hands who never raised his voice in all the years she'd known him. He'd told her once that the loudest men in any room were usually the most frightened. She'd been 12 and hadn't fully understood it. She understood it now. She thought about the way he'd stood behind her on those Montana mornings, not touching, not directing, just present, his silence, a kind of permission. Telling her by not interfering that he trusted her, that the shot was hers to take or not take and no one was going to take it for her. She'd been trying to explain that to people her whole life without having the words for it. The way trust, real trust, wasn't something you gave someone after they'd proved themselves. It was something you extended before as an act of faith, and the proving came afterward. Marcus had understood that. He'd trusted her before she'd done anything to earn it by the team's standards. Before today, before any of this, she hoped he was going to be okay. She believed he was going to be okay. There was a difference and she held on to it. They were 2 miles from the wire when Holt, who was riding up front beside Crane, turned around and looked at her. He'd been working up to something for a while, she could tell by the way he'd been not quite looking at her for the past 20 minutes. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Were you scared up there?" She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about everything. "Not while I was doing it," she said. "There wasn't room to be scared while I was doing it." And now she looked at her hands, completely steady. "Ask me tonight," she said. Holt nodded slowly, turned back around. Briggs opened one eye, looked at Kira with an expression that on his particular face was the rough equivalent of profound respect. Then he closed his eye again. FOB Kestrel came into view through the windshield as the sun was moving past its midpoint. Dusty, loud, raw. The edge of the world, the last place civilization decided it wanted anything to do with. Kira had grown up in places that looked a lot like this in different ways. Hard used and overlooked and louder on the inside than they appeared from the outside. She'd learned in those places that the people who got things done were rarely the people anyone was watching. The woman running the church kitchen while the deacons argued over the budget. The grandfather who fixed 3 neighbors' tractors while they were busy talking about how nothing ever got fixed anymore. The medic at the back of the vehicle who memorized the Barrett's dope adjustment because she couldn't stop herself from learning things that mattered. They passed through the gate. Crane exhaled one long breath. Torres started laughing, the kind of laugh that had nothing to do with anything being funny, just the pressure release of a body that had been holding itself together by force of will for the past 3 hours. Even Briggs uncrossed his arms. Kira climbed out of the vehicle and stood for a moment in the compound, and the noise and the dust settled around her the way they always did, familiar and indifferent. She checked her kit, made a mental note of what she'd used, what needed restocking. Saline, 2 trauma dressings, the C-collar she'd borrowed from the QRF and needed to replace. Dawson walked past her without stopping, but said as he passed, "My office, 1900. "Yes, sir," she said to his back. She didn't know exactly what that meeting was going to look like. She'd never been called to the lieutenant's office for anything other than administrative paperwork. She suspected tonight was going to be different. She suspected that a lot of things were going to be different starting now, and she wasn't entirely sure how she felt about that. What she was sure of was Marcus. She wanted to know where he was, which hospital, what the doctors were saying. She wanted someone to tell her he was awake and complaining the way Walsh was complaining, which meant everything was going to be fine. She found Torres refilling his kit near the medical bay. He looked up when she came in. "You hear anything on Chung?" she asked. "Kandahar Airfield," he said. "They got him there 40 minutes ago. Last I heard, he's awake, disoriented but responsive." She felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully realized was braced. "Okay," she said. "Doc." Torres set down what he was doing and looked at her straight on, not the way people had been looking at her all day, with the stunned recalibration of someone updating their file on you, but just directly human to human. "I heard what happened on that roof." "Torres, I want you to know," he said, and he wasn't going to be stopped, "that I've been in country for 2 deployments, and I've never seen anything like what you did today. And I've seen a lot." She looked at him. "You would have done the same thing." "No," he said simply. "I wouldn't have, because I don't have what you have." He picked up his kit and moved toward the door. "That's not a knock on me. That's just the truth." He paused at the threshold. "He's going to be okay, by the way. Marcus, he's already asking what happened." She nodded. "What do you want me to tell him if they patch him through?" She thought for a moment. "Tell him 2 clicks and compensate for the wind push. He'll know what it means." Torres smiled, the real kind, not the pressure release kind. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think he will." He left. She stood in the medical bay alone in the quiet, and for the first time since the convoy had rolled out that morning, there was nothing immediate demanding her attention. No casualty, no shot to take, no calculation to run. She sat down on the edge of a cot and stared at the middle distance for a moment. Then quietly, with no one watching, Kira Vaughn put her face in her small hands and breathed. In and out, steady as a trigger pull, the way her grandfather had taught her. She wasn't falling apart. She was just making room for everything that had happened to settle into its proper place. Outside the base continued its noise. Generators, rotors, voices, the particular machinery of a place that never fully stopped moving. Inside, she sat in the still place between heartbeats and waited for evening. The meeting was at 1900 and Kira was there at 1855. Dawson's office was a converted shipping container with a plywood desk and a map board that took up most of one wall. He was already seated when she came in, and there was someone else in the room. She hadn't expected Colonel Brian Merritt, the senior officer overseeing all special operations elements in their sector. He was a tall man, 50s, with the specific kind of stillness that came not from training, but from having made enough hard decisions that urgency had simply run out of room in his body. Kira came to attention. At ease, Dawson said, and something in his voice told her this was not going to be a standard debrief. Merritt looked at her the way she imagined he looked at terrain reports carefully without prejudgment, extracting information. Sit down, Specialist Vaughn. She sat. I've spent the last 3 hours reading everything in your file, Merritt said, and then I spent another hour reading the after-action statements from your team members. He paused. And I want to ask you a question that I want you to answer honestly without any concern for how the answer reflects on you or anyone else. Yes, sir. Why didn't you tell us what you were capable of? She'd been expecting some version of this question. She'd been turning her answer over since the helicopter had lifted Marcus away from that rooftop. She didn't give the short version, not to a colonel asking it that directly in that tone. Because I'd been told 3 times that the role I wanted wasn't available to me, she said. So I found the role that was available and I did it well. I figured if I did it well enough, long enough, the rest would either matter or it wouldn't. She paused. Today it mattered. Merritt was quiet for a moment. The insurgent shooter, Ghost. Our intelligence assets have been trying to locate and neutralize him for 7 months. He leaned forward slightly. Your round impacted approximately 14 inches from his position. He was extracted by his own people. We picked up radio traffic indicating a casualty. Not a fatality, but a significant wound. He let that sit for a moment. You hit him, Vaughn. You didn't kill him, but you hit him. At 840 meters under fire with a rifle that wasn't yours and a position that had no prepared support. You hit him. She felt something move through her, not pride exactly. Something quieter and more complicated than pride. I should have hit him clean, she said. Dawson made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. What I'm going to ask you now, Merritt continued, is not an order. It is a request, and you have every right to say no. He folded his hands on the desk. We want to formalize what you're already doing. Keep your medical role, your team needs that, and you're exceptional at it. But we want to document your marksmanship qualifications, get you properly fitted into the team's operational structure as a secondary precision asset, and we want you to start doing range work officially instead of unofficially. He paused. What do you say? Kira thought about those 3 assessment rejections. About every morning she'd repack the kit and watch the briefings from the outside. About Marcus telling her the team deserved to know what its assets were capable of. I'd like that, sir, she said. Good. Merritt stood, meeting over in that efficient way of senior officers who had 17 other things requiring their attention. At the door, he stopped without turning around. Your grandfather, Robert Braun, Force Recon, 1968 to 1972. She blinked. Yes, sir. Merritt was quiet for a beat. I knew his name growing up. One of my instructors talked about him. He opened the door. Good genes, he said, and was gone. Dawson looked at her across the desk. Something in his face had changed from this morning, not dramatically, but genuinely. The kind of change that happens when a person realizes they've been holding an incomplete picture and finally gets the missing piece. 1930, he said. You're dismissed. She stood, came to attention, and left. Outside, the base had shifted into its evening register generators running at a lower pitch. Fewer vehicles moving the particular quality of noise that FOB Kestrel made when it was settling into its overnight posture. She stood for a moment and breathed the cool air, which smelled of dust and diesel, and the faint, far-off scent of cooking fires from somewhere beyond the wire. Her radio crackled. Torres. Doc, you get a call through to Kandahar yet? Not yet. Patch Bay's open. Marcus is apparently awake, and I quote, extremely annoyed about something, which means he's fine. She started moving before he finished the sentence. The communications bay was a low-ceilinged room with two sat phone stations and a radio bank that ran around 3 walls. Petty Officer Lynn was on duty, a small, precise woman who handled comms the way Kira handled trauma efficiently and without wasted motion. She looked up when Kira came in. "Kandahar," Lynn said. "Please." Lynn made the connection in under 2 minutes. The line had that specific satellite quality, half a beat delayed, slightly compressed, making everyone sound like they were calling from underwater. But when Marcus Chung's voice came through, it was unmistakably entirely him. "Who picked up my rifle?" Kira sat down in the chair beside the station. "You're awake." "I've been awake for 2 hours. Who picked up my rifle?" "I did." The line was quiet for exactly 1 satellite delay beat. Then Kira, not Doc, Kira. "I'm here," she said. "What happened after I went down? The whole story. Don't skip anything." So she told him. He didn't interrupt once, which was unusual for Marcus, who typically ran his internal commentary out loud whether or not the situation called for it. He listened all the way through the first shot, the repositioning, the second shot, Dawson's 8-inch miss, the final engagement, the silence from the ridgeline. When she finished, there was a longer pause. 14 inches, he said. "From what they're telling me." Cold bore shot, unknown, rifle 0, no prepared position under active fire. "Yes." Another pause. She could almost hear him recalculating something. "Your grandfather would have hit it clean." It startled a sound out of her that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't quite crying. "That's what I said." He also would have said that 14 inches under those conditions is not something to feel bad about. Marcus's voice shifted, lost a layer of operational flatness, found something underneath it. "You kept them alive, Kira. You kept my rifle out of the wrong situation. You did the job." A pause. "I knew you could." She pressed her free hand flat against the desk to give herself something solid. "I know you did." "What did Dawson say?" "Merritt was there." Silence. "Colonel Merritt was in the debrief." "Yes." "And they're formalizing it," she said. "The marksmanship role, alongside the medical role." The silence this time had a different quality. Warmer. She could hear Marcus breathing slow and deliberate the way he breathed when he was working something through. "I want you to know something," he said. "When I started letting you run range sessions with me, I didn't do that out of charity. I didn't do it because I felt sorry for you or because I wanted to give you something to feel good about." His voice was careful and exact, the way it was when he was picking his words, the way he picked his shot. "I did it because you were better than most of the certified shooters I'd worked with, and it seemed like a criminal waste not to develop that. You understand?" "Yes," she said. "Good. Now get some sleep. You've had a longer day than most people have in a deployment." "How's your head?" "Feels like someone tried to rearrange my skull with a ball-peen hammer." "That's approximately what happened." "Comforting. Tell Torres he owes me $20. "For what?" "He'll know." The line clicked off. She sat for a moment into the quiet of the comms bay, with Lynn pretending to be intensely interested in her equipment panel, and she let herself have 30 seconds of something uncomplicated. Not triumph, not relief, just the specific warmth of a person telling you they believed in you before you gave them any reason to. Then she stood up, thanked Lynn, and went to find Torres. She found him in the chow hall, which at this hour was half empty and smelled strongly of reconstituted everything. He was sitting across from Briggs, which was notable because, as far as Kira could tell, Briggs voluntarily interacted with approximately 3 people, and Torres was not usually one of them. They both looked up when she came in. "He says you owe him $20, she told Torres. Torres put his face in his hands. "I told him you'd pick up the rifle. I told him weeks ago, I said, if anything ever happened to you on Overwatch, Doc would..." He dropped his hands, looked at her. "I bet against myself. I was certain about you, and I still bet against myself out of habit." He shook his head. $20, worth it." She sat down across from them both. Someone had left a tray on the table, and she realized, sitting down, that she hadn't eaten since 500 that morning. She pulled the tray toward her without ceremony. Briggs watched her eat for a moment. Then he said in that economy of words way of his, "Holt's been talking." She looked up. "What's he saying?" "The truth," Briggs said. "Which is the problem." She set down the fork. "What do you mean, the problem?" Briggs looked at Torres. Torres looked at the table. Some kind of decision passed between them in the way decisions pass between people who'd been downrange together long enough to communicate in half sentences. Torres said, "There are some guys on the base, not our element, the support company, who've been saying things." "What kind of thing?" The kind of things he said carefully that people say when something happens that breaks the story they have been telling themselves. He looked at her straight, that you got lucky, that the shot was a fluke, that Marcus had already wounded Ghost before he went down, and you just happened to fire at the right time, in the right direction. She absorbed this without visible reaction. It wasn't surprising. She'd known on some level that the day wasn't going to land cleanly with everyone. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what it meant about what they'd been assuming. And people protected their assumptions the way they protected everything else they relied on. Who specifically, she said. Does it matter? She thought about it. No, she admitted, not really. It's going to matter tomorrow, Briggs said, which was the longest sentence she'd heard him produce in weeks. He said it in the flat way of someone stating a meteorological fact, like it's going to rain. Not a warning, just information. She looked at him. Why tomorrow specifically? Briggs just looked at her. Torres shifted in his seat. What happens tomorrow, she said. Torres said, intel briefing at 0700. Merritt wants a full sector assessment given what happened today. Ghost's injury changes the threat picture. His handlers are going to want to either pull him back or push him harder, depending on how bad the wound is. Either way, the next 48 hours are going to be the most active since we got here. And she understood then what Briggs was telling her without telling her. Tomorrow, it wasn't going to be enough to have done what she'd done today. Tomorrow, the question of who Kira Vaughn actually was, what she could actually do, was going to be put in front of a room full of people, some of whom were already building their argument against the answer. She picked up her fork again, finished eating, calmly. Okay, she said. Torres blinked. Okay, that's it? What else do you want me to say? I don't know something about being angry or nervous or... I'm not angry, she said. I've been underestimated my entire career. It's the most consistent thing about this job. She stood up, picked up the empty tray. The difference between today and every day before today is that now there's a round in a rock face at 840 meters that says something true about me, and that's not going anywhere. She walked the tray to the disposal station, came back to the table for her kit. Briggs said, 2 clicks and compensate for the wind push. She stopped, looked at him. His face didn't change expression, but his eyes did, just slightly. Torres told me what you said to pass on to Marcus, before you knew if he was going to be okay. He paused. That was the right thing to say. She didn't know how to answer that, so she didn't. She just nodded once and left. The night air was cold in the way Afghan nights were cold, sharp-edged and immediate, dropping 40 degrees from the afternoon heat, like the temperature had a personal vendetta. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked the perimeter of the medical bay, doing what she always did when her mind was running hard moving, thinking through motion instead of sitting still with it. Tomorrow, an intelligence briefing with Merritt, with people who'd spent the day building cases against what she'd done, with an institutional structure that was in the process of officially changing to make room for her, which meant it was also in the process of being defended by everyone it was changing away from. She thought about her grandfather's hands, the way he placed them on her shoulders when she was 9 years old and handed her a rifle that was nearly as tall as she was and said, "This is a tool. It does not care what you look like. It only cares what you understand." She'd spent 13 years understanding. Then something happened that stopped her mid-step. The radio on her belt crackled, not the team net, the medical emergency channel that ran parallel to tactical. A voice she didn't immediately recognize, clipped with urgency. Medical FOB Kestrel, be advised we have a priority casualty incoming. Medevac ET, 12 minutes. Patient is a crackle, static. Then enemy combatant, wounded, captured at the northern ridgeline approximately 90 minutes ago. Kira stopped breathing for 1 full second. Then the voice said the words she was not prepared for. Patient presence with a right side thoracic wound consistent with a large caliber round. Stable but critical. He was carrying this when they found him. Another crackle. A Russian-made SVD-K sniper rifle. Night scope, custom suppressor. The radio fell silent. Ghost was coming to FOB Kestrel, and the wound in his chest was the wound that Kira's round had made. She stood in the cold dark for 3 seconds that felt like they had no bottom to them. Then she keyed her radio. Medical Vaughn, receiving. What's the patient's trauma status? Hemop pneumothorax right side. Field dressing applied at capture. B, P is dropping. They're pushing fluids, but he needs a chest tube and he needs it 10 minutes ago. I'll be ready, she said. She was already moving toward the medical bay. The thing about being a combat medic that people who weren't combat medics never fully understood was that you didn't get to choose your patients. Not by who they were, not by what they'd done, not by how you felt about them at 2,100 on the worst day of your operational life. You had a patient, and the patient had a wound, and the wound needed to be managed. That was the entire equation. Everything else, the rifle he was carrying, the 4 coalition soldiers he'd killed, the way he'd been waiting in that rock notch to kill Dawson from 8 inches away, was outside the equation. Completely and deliberately outside it. She had the chest tube kit laid out before the vehicle reached the gate. Torres came in at a dead run 40 seconds later, reading her face, reading the setup, not asking questions. He pulled on gloves, got into position. The way they'd done it 100 times in training and 9 times in the field. "Who is it?" he said. "Don't know yet," she said. "Doesn't matter." He looked at the trauma setup, looked at her. "Doc." "Torres." "You know it might be." "I know," she said. "Set up the chest drain." He did. The vehicle came through the gate hard and fast, and the doors were open before it fully stopped, and the litter came out with 2 QRF soldiers who looked like they'd been awake for 30 hours, and on the litter was a man she'd never seen before. Unconscious, compact and lean, with a field dressing around his right chest that was soaked through completely. She moved to him without hesitation. Whatever she'd been expecting. Ghost to look like the mythologized enemy who'd haunted their sector for 8 months. The name said in low voices, the shooter who never appeared in the same place twice. She had not been expecting this. He was young, maybe 25, maybe less. His face was unmarked except for the dust and the blood and the specific grayness of a man losing hemodynamic stability by the minute. She put her hands on him and started working. Right-sided breath sounds diminished, she said, not to Torres, just into the air where the information needed to go. Trachea midline, so we're not deviated yet, but we need this tube now. Ready, Torres said. On my mark. She worked quickly and without ceremony and without any thought in her head except the work. Behind her, she was distantly aware of people gathering, soldiers who'd heard the comms, who knew what was incoming, who had opinions about what should happen to this particular patient. She could feel that gathering the way you feel a crowd behind you without turning around. She did not turn around. The chest tube went in clean. The hemop pneumothorax began draining. The patient's color imperceptibly, incrementally began to stabilize. BP's coming up, Torres said quietly. Keep the fluids going. Doc. Torres's voice dropped lower. There's people behind you. I know. Some of them are... I know, she said again. Keep the fluids going, Torres. Someone behind her said loudly enough to be unmistakable. Why are we keeping that man alive? She didn't turn around. Because that's what we do, she said to the wound, to the tube, to the patient who couldn't hear her. That's what we do, and that's who we are. And nothing about today changes that. The room was very quiet for a long moment. Then she heard Dawson's voice from the doorway, measured and absolute. Everyone who doesn't have a medical role in this bay right now is going to find somewhere else to be, starting immediately. Boots on concrete, the crowd dispersing, Dawson staying, Kira worked. And slowly under her hands, the man who had been trying to kill her team all day stopped trying to die. Ghost didn't die that night. By 2300, he was stable enough to transfer to the surgical unit at Kandahar Airfield, the same facility where Marcus Chung was recovering 2 wards away. Kira didn't think about the irony of that until much later, the hunter and the hunted, separated by a corridor and a set of swing doors, both breathing because of the same pair of hands. She finished her documentation at 2330, sitting at the small desk in the corner of the medical bay with a headlamp and a pen, writing the trauma notes in the precise clinical language she'd been trained to write them in. Mechanism of injury, large caliber gunshot wound, right thorax. Intervention, chest tube thoracostomy. Patient response positive. She did not write who she thought the patient was. She did not write what it felt like to work on him. The medical record was not the place for those things. Torres found her there an hour later, still at the desk, not writing anymore. Just sitting. You should sleep, he said. In a little while. He sat down on the cot across from her. He looked tired in the specific way of people who'd started the day with a certain understanding of how the world worked and ended, it needing to revise that understanding significantly. How do you feel? She thought about the question seriously. Strange, she said. Not bad, strange, just strange. Like the day was 2 different days and I'm trying to figure out which one I'm actually inside of. Torres nodded slowly. The shot or the patient bombs? Both, she said. And neither. I keep thinking about the morning, about you telling me to keep my tourniquet accessible. You knew something was going to go wrong. I didn't know anything. I just felt it. That's knowledge, she said. It's just the kind that doesn't have a name yet. She folded her hands on the desk. You moved that tourniquet without asking why. Because you trusted me. Even before today when no one was supposed to trust me for anything beyond my kit. Torres was quiet for a moment. I've always trusted you, Doc. I know, she said. That meant more than you know. He left her to sleep, which she did eventually on the cot in the medical bay, fully clothed, kit within arm's reach. It was a medic's sleep light, interruptible, one ear always open. But it was enough. She was up at 0530. The 0700 intelligence briefing was in the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, the nerve center of FOB Kestrel, where maps and monitors and people who made decisions lived together in controlled chaos. Kira had been in the TOC exactly twice before today, both times to drop off medical supply requisitions. She had never been invited to a briefing. The invitation this time had come from Dawson the previous evening, 4 words through Torres Vaughn, TOC 07. She arrived at 0650. The room was already half full. Merritt at the head of the table. Dawson to his left. 3 other officers she recognized by face and function, but had never spoken to directly. 2 intelligence analysts with that particular look of people who processed information for a living, slightly detached, always scanning. And ranged along the walls, the senior enlisted Holt Briggs, a master sergeant from the support company named Caldwell, who she'd heard speak exactly once, and whose voice she'd never forgotten, because it had the quality of a man who believed he was always the most important person in any room he entered. Caldwell looked at her when she came in, not with hostility exactly, with assessment, the kind of look that was already building a counter-argument before it knew what the argument was going to be about. She found a position against the wall near Holt and stood easy. Holt leaned 2 inches toward her and said, barely audible, Caldwell's been talking to his CO. About what he said, in the debrief, and whether certain things should be on record as official. She processed this. He thinks I should be challenged. I think he thinks the after action should reflect some ambiguity about whether Ghost was already compromised before you fired. Holt's voice was flat and factual. His argument, apparently, is that Marcus had already engaged from the roof before the blast, and it's possible Ghost was already operating at a disadvantage when you took your shots. She thought about this. Technically, it wasn't impossible. Marcus had been running Overwatch. It was within the realm of possibility that he'd gotten around into Ghost before the blast knocked him off the hatch. There was no way to definitively disprove it. The round she'd fired had wounded Ghost, but the wound could theoretically have been compounded by a prior hit. It was the kind of argument that was almost impossible to argue against and almost completely dishonest. Okay, she said. Holt looked at her. Okay, that's the second time in 2 days you've said that to something that should bother you more. It bothers me, she said, but being bothered and being moved are 2 different things. The briefing started at exactly 700. Merritt ran it with the efficiency of a man who knew exactly how much time each piece of information was worth. The intelligence picture, first Ghost's identity, had been partially confirmed through a combination of the captured weapon's serial trace and a cellular intercept picked up after the engagement. His name, as best they could determine, was Yusuf Haidari, 23 years old. Trained, the analysts believed outside the country, the level of technical skill was inconsistent with what local insurgent networks had been producing independently. Which means one of the analysts said that his network has external support, which means removing him doesn't end the capability, it just delays it until they insert someone else. How long a delay, Merritt asked. 6 to 18 months to develop an equivalent asset, if we've taken this one off the board for good. His surgical status, Merritt directed this at the room generally. Kira answered because she was the one who had the information. He was transferred to Kandahar at 2315. The chest tube held through transport. Last I heard before I came in here, he was in surgery. The wound track missed the major vessels. He'll live. She paused. He'll probably lose partial lung function on the right side permanently, but he'll live. The room was quiet for a moment, not uncomfortable, just processing. Then Caldwell spoke. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. I want to go on record about something before we proceed. Merritt looked at him. Go ahead, Master Sergeant. The after action as currently written credits Specialist Vaughn with a precision engagement at 840 meters that wounded the target. Caldwell's voice was measured and professional. I have a concern about whether the record reflects all available context. Merritt said, explain the concern. Sergeant Chung was on that rooftop running Overwatch prior to the blast. We don't have documentation of whether he engaged before going down. If he did, it's possible the target was already impaired when Specialist Vaughn fired. It changes how we characterize the nature of the engagement. The room was very quiet. Kira kept her face neutral and her breathing steady and did not look at Caldwell because looking at him would suggest that his opinion was creating a reaction worth registering. Merritt said, "Do you have evidence that Chung engaged prior to going down?" "No direct evidence, sir." "But the absence of evidence isn't—" "The Barrett's round counter," Kira said. Everyone looked at her. She kept her voice clean and factual. "The Barrett M82 has an internal round counter that logs with each firing cycle. If Marcus fired a round before the blast, the counter would show it. The rifle is in the armory. The log can be checked in about 4 minutes." She paused. Marcus hadn't fired. The round in the chamber was the same round he'd chambered during the pre-mission prep. "I know because I checked the counter before I set up behind the rifle." She looked at Merritt, not at Caldwell. "I check everything I'm about to use. Habit." The silence that followed had a different quality from any silence the morning had produced so far. Merritt looked at Caldwell. "Does that address your concern, Master Sergeant?" Caldwell was quiet for precisely 1 beat too long. "Yes, sir," he said. "Good." Merritt moved on without ceremony the way a man moves on when he considers a matter settled. The intelligence briefing continued. Threat reassessment, route modifications for the next 72 hours, asset positioning. When Merritt got to the section on long-range overwatch coverage during the period of Marcus's recovery, he looked at Kira directly and said, "Vaughn will serve as secondary precision asset during Chung's absence coordinated through Dawson's element. Her qualifications will be formally documented in the personnel record by end of week." Nobody challenged it, not even Caldwell, who looked at his hands and said nothing, which was his own kind of answer. After the briefing, Holt fell into step beside her as she moved down the corridor toward the medical bay. He didn't say anything for 20 paces, which was a long time for Holt, who was generally comfortable filling silence. Then he said, "The round counter, you actually checked that." "I check everything I'm about to use," she said. "I told you. Habit." "How long have you been doing that?" "Checking the counter before you fire. My grandfather made it a rule. He said never pick up a weapon without knowing its exact state. He said assumptions about weapons were how people died." Holt processed this. "And you checked it even in the middle of all of that, with Marcus down and the firefight going, and then especially then," she said, "especially then is when it matters most." He shook his head slowly. "Doc." "What?" He stopped walking. She stopped too. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite categorize, something that sat between admiration and something more personal, the specific look of a person recognizing that they'd been sharing a space with someone significant without fully knowing it. "We wasted you," he said. "This team wasted you. For 3 months we had you patching knees and cataloging saline, and we wasted—" "You didn't waste me," she said. "I was doing a job that needed doing. The team was never unhealthy on my watch, Holt. Not once in 3 months. Walsh's bleed was controlled in under 4 minutes this morning. Torres handled the abdominal presentation without hesitation because I'd been training him since week 2. She met his eyes. Nothing was wasted. It was all the same job. He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know whether to feel better or worse about that." "Feel useful," she said. "That's the only feeling worth having around here." She left him in the corridor. The morning passed with the particular administrative weight of a post-engagement day, paperwork resupply requests, equipment assessments. She restocked the trauma kits with the precision she brought to everything, inventorying what had been used and calculating what the next 72 hours were likely to require given the elevated threat posture. She ran a training session with Torres on needle decompression, which she'd been planning for 2 weeks and which the previous day's events had made newly urgent in both their minds. At 1400, her radio crackled. "Dawson Vaughn Armory, bring your kit." She went. The armory was run by a taciturn petty officer named Gaines, who treated weapons with the same focused devotion some people applied to religion. He had the Barrett M82 laid out on the bench when she arrived alongside a set of qualification targets and a small collection of documentation that she recognized as the official weapons certification forms. Dawson was there. Gaines was there. And to her surprise, Briggs standing in the corner with his arms crossed, which she'd come to understand was his version of engaged interest. "This is going to be official," Dawson said. "Gaines is going to run the documentation. You're going to requalify on record so it's clean in the file." He paused. "And then we're going to talk about what this looks like operationally going forward." Gaines looked up from the bench. He had the expression of a man who had been told something surprising and was deciding whether to let it stay surprising or to simply incorporate it into his operational picture and move on. He'd apparently chosen the latter. You're comfortable with the platform, he said. The Barrett, yes, she said. I've also run the M110 and the MK12. I'm more accurate on the Barrett at distance, but the M110 is easier to work with in confined overwatch positions. Gaines looked at Dawson. She knows the M110. Apparently, Dawson said. Gaines made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated clearly that he was recalibrating. He picked up a pen. All right, Vaughn, let's start from the beginning and do this properly. The qualification process took 2 hours. Range work documentation, the formal verification of skills she'd been practicing informally for years. It felt different doing it officially with forms and signatures and a senior petty officer watching and recording, and she couldn't have said precisely why it felt different because the skills were the same skills. But there was something about having it witnessed, having it put into the record, that gave it a weight the informal sessions with Marcus had lacked. When it was done, Gaines signed the bottom of the qualification sheet and slid it across the bench to Dawson. She qualifies expert on the platform, he said, consistent with special operations precision standards. Dawson picked up the form, looked at it. Good. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket. Looked at Kira. How's your secondary sidearm always current? No, he said. I mean, how are you secondary to everything else? You had a significant operational day yesterday and you've been running at full tempo since 05:30. How are you actually doing? It was the kind of question she hadn't expected from Dawson, who was a competent and fair officer, but not someone she'd associated with that particular type of attentiveness. The question caught her sideways just enough that her answer came out without its usual careful filtering. I keep thinking about his face, she said. Dawson didn't ask who. He knew. Ghost, she said. Haidari. He was 23 years old, maybe less, and when they brought him in, she stopped, found the even register again. I've treated a lot of casualties. Coalition civilian, 2 enemy combatants before last night. I know the medical role doesn't ask me to have opinions about the patient. I know that, and I believe it, and I did the job correctly. She paused. But he had a face, and it was young, and I keep thinking about what made a 23-year-old that precise with a rifle. What kind of life produces that? Briggs from the corner said quietly, same kind that produced you. She looked at him. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The point was simple and brutal and completely honest, that skill didn't care about the direction it pointed. That dedication and discipline and years of practice looked the same from the outside regardless of what cause they served. That the difference between her and Yusuf Haidari was not talent or commitment, but the specific accident of which side of a particular line they'd each been born on. She sat with that for a moment. Yeah, she said finally, I know. Dawson looked between them both. The difference, he said, is what you do with it and what you protect with it. That's the only difference that matters, but you're allowed to know it's complicated. She nodded once. Get some food, he said. Actual food, not whatever Torres has been feeding you from the medical bay. She almost smiled. That was 1 time. It was 3 times, I counted. She left the armory and walked toward the chow hall and thought as she walked about what Briggs had said. The same kind that produced you. She'd spent most of her career separating herself from the things that seemed like her, quiet, overlooked, underestimated, and trying to align herself with the things she wanted to be. Precise, reliable, trusted, effective. She was still thinking about it when she pushed open the chow hall door and stopped. Every person in the room looked up. It wasn't dramatic. No one stood. No one started clapping. It wasn't that kind of military unit, and she wouldn't have wanted it to be. But there was a pause, a collective beat of recognition, and in that pause, she understood that the story of what had happened on that rooftop had spread the way. Stories spread in small, high-pressure environments, completely and with acceleration, until everyone had a version of it. She took a tray and got in line. The soldier behind the serving station, a young private she'd treated twice for minor injuries who'd never spoken more than 6 words to her, looked at her and said, Doc, whatever you want, extra portion. She looked at him. I'm fine with the regular. Extra portion, he said again, and spooned an amount of food onto her tray that suggested he'd been waiting for this opportunity. She took the tray to an empty table near the far wall and sat down. Within 4 minutes, Holt was across from her. Then Torres, then 2 operators from the support element she'd never spoken to who sat down without asking because the table had clearly become the table. She ate and let the conversation happen around her, the kind of easy post-operational talk that military people fell into naturally, stories and small complaints and the particular humor of people who'd been genuinely scared and were now safe and could almost laugh about it. She didn't contribute much. She rarely did, but she listened. And the listening felt different tonight than it had 3 months ago when she'd been new to the unit and the conversations had happened around her in a way that excluded without intending to. Now they happened around her and included her even in the silence, especially in the silence. Her radio went at 2015. Kandahar airfield patched through the comms bay. She stepped outside to take it. Doc Vaughn, a voice she didn't recognize a doctor by his cadence. "I'm calling on behalf of Sergeant First Class Marcus Chung." He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Tell her I'm extremely annoyed that I missed the brief." He also said to tell you, a pause. She could hear the doctor presumably reading something. "2 clicks compensate for the wind push, and that you owe him a conversation when he gets back." She leaned against the wall of the building, looked up at the Afghan sky, which was absolutely full of stars, the way it always was out here, away from city light. More stars than any sky had a right to have. "Tell him I'll be here," she said. "I'll pass that along." The doctor paused. "You're the medic who stabilized him on the roof." "Yes. He's asked about you 4 times today." A brief professional pause. "He's going to be fine, specialist. Full recovery expected. He'll be back in 8 to 10 weeks if he follows protocol, which he appears constitutionally incapable of doing so. I'd estimate 6. She said, "Thank you, doctor." "Thank you," he said, simply and directly, "for what you did out there today, for Marcus, and for," he stopped, recalibrated. "Just thank you." The line went quiet. She stood in the dark for a moment. The stars didn't move. The generators hummed. Somewhere across the wire in the mountains that were always there and always watching the landscape was as indifferent as it had always been to the specific dramas of the people moving through it. She thought about being 9 years old in a Montana field with a rifle and a grandfather who trusted her with something real. She thought about 3 assessment rejections and the particular taste of being told you are too much of one thing and not enough of another. She thought about Marcus's hand steadying the rifle during those early range sessions, not directing, just present, not doing the work for her, just making it possible for her to do it herself. Then her radio went again. Dawson's voice clipped and operational, the voice that meant something had moved. "Vaughn, OC now." She pushed off the wall and moved, because the work was never finished. And Kira Vaughn, the quiet girl from Montana, with small hands and a grandfather's training, and 3 years of being underestimated, built into her bones, had stopped waiting for permission to be exactly who she was. She was already moving. She was always moving. The TOC at 2015 was a different room than it had been at 0700. Same maps, same monitors, same low ceiling and fluorescent light, and the smell of bad coffee and electronics running too hot. But the people in it carried a different weight, the weight of something that had broken open during the day and hadn't fully settled yet. Merritt was at the head of the table again, but this time there were faces she didn't recognize. 2 men in civilian clothing with military haircuts and the particular brand of stillness that didn't come from combat training, but from something older and more deliberate. Intelligence community. She'd seen the type before, and she knew enough to know she didn't know exactly which part of the community they represented. Dawson was beside Merritt. Holt was against the back wall. Briggs was there too, which told her this was serious because Briggs did not attend optional meetings. "Close the door," Merritt said. She closed it. "Sit down, Vaughn." She sat. Merritt said, "What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. The classification is above your current clearance level, which I'm temporarily extending for the purpose of this conversation. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "Yusuf Haidari Ghost is conscious. He came out of surgery 3 hours ago." Merritt paused. "And he's talking." The room was very quiet. "Talking," she said carefully, "requesting specifically." Merritt's voice was neutral in the way of a man delivering information he was still processing himself. "He's been told that the precision shooter who wounded him was a woman, a medic, 22 years old." Another pause. "He's asked to speak with her directly, before he'll say anything else to anyone." She kept her face still. "Why can't we don't know," one of the civilian men said. His voice was quiet and measured agency voice, she thought, the kind trained to give away nothing. "But he's consistent about it. 3 separate interrogators, 3 separate attempts, and each time he shuts down and says the same thing. He'll talk to her, nobody else." She looked at Merritt. "You're asking me to go to Kandahar." "I'm asking if you're willing," Merritt said. "This is not an order. This is not a medical assignment. This is a request that you can refuse without any consequence to your record or your position." She thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved, which was about 4 seconds. When do I leave? Merritt almost showed something in his face. Oh, 400. Transport's already arranged. Is Marcus still at Kandahar? Same facility, different ward. She nodded once. Then yes. Dawson looked at her from across the table with an expression she'd come to understand as his version of concern, which on his face looked mostly like slightly elevated attention. You know you don't have to do this, he said. I know, she said. I want to. Why? She thought about Briggs in the armory, the same kind that produced you. She thought about 23 years old and a rifle, and whatever road had led from a childhood somewhere in these mountains to a notch in a rock face with crosshairs on American soldiers. Because he asked for me, she said, and because I want to understand why Nobody had an argument for that. She slept 3 hours. At 03:45, she was packed and at the flight line, standing in the cold dark with a kit and a coffee that Holt had pressed into her hand without a word. She drank it while the rotor spun up. Doc. Holt's voice close under the rotor noise. She turned. He looked at her with that particular openness that some men only showed when it was very early or very late and the usual armor was still half off. Whatever he tells you in there, whatever his reason is for asking for you, you don't owe him anything. You understand? You did your the medical job and the other job. You don't owe him a single thing. She looked at him. I know, she said, but maybe he owes me an answer. Holt thought about that, nodded slowly. Fair enough, he said. The flight to Kandahar took 40 minutes. The facility was large and well lit and smelled of antiseptic and institutional coffee and the kind of compressed urgency that military hospitals carried in their walls the way civilian hospitals carried calm. She was met at the entrance by a captain from the intelligence unit who walked her through the clearance process quickly and professionally and without small talk, which she appreciated. They stopped outside a door with an armed guard on each side. He's been told you're coming, the captain said. He's been cooperative in terms of basic medical compliance. He understands he's a prisoner. He hasn't been aggressive. He paused. He's also been quiet, very quiet. The kind of quiet that... He stopped, searched for the right word. That feels like it's costing him something. She understood that kind of quiet. She'd lived inside it for most of her career. Anyone in the room with us, we'll have audio, no visual unless you request it. One guard outside the door. If you need to exit, you say the word and the door opens in under 3 seconds. What's the word in Kestrel? She almost smiled. Okay. You ready? She thought about her grandfather standing behind her in a Montana field with his hands at his sides, and his silence meaning this is yours to do. Yes, she said. The room was small. Haidari was in a hospital bed, chest bandaged, the right side of his torso wrapped in the precise way she would have wrapped it herself, an IV in his left arm. Monitors running. He looked even younger than he had on the litter the night before, which she hadn't thought was possible. His eyes were open and they tracked her from the moment she came through the door, alert, measuring the eyes of someone accustomed to reading environments for threat. She pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. Not close enough to be aggressive, not far enough to be distant. The way she sat with patience, the medical register. He would recognize it, she thought. He said something in Pashto. She said, I don't speak Pashto. We'll need the interpreter. He switched to English. Accented, precise, clearly learned, formally rather than organically. I know, he said. I tested it to see if you would pretend. He studied her face. You didn't pretend. I don't pretend, she said. I'm Kira Vaughn. You asked for me. You shot me, he said. Yes. And then you kept me alive. It wasn't a question. He said it the way someone states a fact they've been sitting with for hours and still haven't fully made sense of. Yes, she said again. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes didn't leave her face. How old are you? 22. Something moved across his expression. Brief, complex, too fast to categorize. I am 23, he said. She nodded. She'd known this. It landed differently hearing it from him. My instructor, he said slowly, told me the Americans put their women behind their lines, away from the fighting. He said this was a weakness, that it meant half their strength was hidden and unused. He paused, and the pause had the quality of a man revising something fundamental. He was wrong. She said, a lot of people are wrong about that. I saw you on the roof. His voice was quiet without emotion that she could name, though she felt something underneath it, not hostility, not self-pity, something more like a reckoning. After the first shot, I repositioned because I thought, he stopped. I thought it was the man, the one I had marked, the one who went down. I thought he had recovered. A beat. Then the second shot came from the same position, and I understood it was not him. What did you understand? She said. He looked at her with those measuring eyes. That I had made an error in my assessment, he said, and that the error was going to cost me. She said it did. Yes, he looked at his bandaged chest. You could have left me to die, he said. But last night I was told you were there, that you put in the tube. He looked back at her. Why? She thought about all the answers she could give. The philosophical ones, the clinical ones, the ones about rules and ethics and the medical oath and the laws of war. They were all true. She chose the truest one. Because that's who I am, she said. Not because of you, not despite you, just because of who I am. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, my instructor, the man who trained me. He stopped. His jaw tightened. She recognized the specific tension of someone deciding whether to cross a line they've been holding for a long time. He is not from here. He has never been from here. He came 18 months ago with money and weapons and a methodology that he said was in service of God and country. His voice stayed flat and even, but underneath it, she could feel the fracture spreading. He selected me because I had precision, because I was consistent. He said I was serving something larger than myself. He stopped again. He was in a safe house in Jalalabad when I was lying in that ridgeline. He is always in a safe house somewhere. Kira did not move, did not react visibly. But something had shifted in the room and she could feel the intelligence officers behind the audio feed holding their collective breath. His name, she said quietly. Haidari looked at her. If I tell you his name, he said, what happens to me? I don't make those decisions. She said honestly, I'm a medic. I'm here because you asked for me, not because I have the authority to make you deals. I know, he said. I asked for you because you were the only honest thing that happened to me yesterday. He held her eyes. The shot was honest. The medicine was honest. Everything else, he stopped. Everything else was someone using me for something. She said nothing. She let him have the silence. He told her the name. It took 3 minutes. He gave her not just the name, but a location, a communication pattern, a supply chain, and the names of 2 other external trainers operating in the same network. He gave it to her in the flat, precise way of someone who had made a decision and was executing it completely without negotiating with himself about it. When he was done, he looked at the ceiling. I do not know, he said quietly, if what I have done today is the right thing or the wrong thing. I do not know if I am a traitor or if I am finally being honest. He paused. But I know that the person across from me is 22 years old and was willing to kill me and willing to save me. And I have never met anyone who held both of those things at the same time without lying about one of them. She said, you don't have to know today what kind of thing it was. Some decisions take longer than a day to understand. He looked at her. The measuring quality was still there in his eyes, but something behind it had shifted. The held-tight thing had loosened just enough to let some air in. Your chest tube is holding well, she said. You'll need to stay still for at least 72 hours. The drainage, I know, he said quietly. I had medical training before. He paused. Before I became this. She stood up, pushed the chair back, stood beside the bed for a moment, in the way she stood beside every patient she was leaving present until she wasn't. Vaughn, he said. She looked at him. The first shot, he said, the one that moved me. At 840 meters under fire, no preparation. What were you thinking when you fired? She thought about the Montana field, about the still place between heartbeats, about her grandfather's hands at his sides not interfering. Nothing, she said. You think through everything before the shot. During the shot, there's nothing to think. You've either done the work or you haven't. He nodded slowly, like a man recognizing something in a language he'd almost forgotten he spoke. She walked to the door, said the word. It opened in under 3 seconds. She walked down the hall without stopping, past the intelligence captain who fell into step beside her. With questions she answered in the flat debrief voice she'd developed over the past 24 hours, the voice that delivered information without performing it. By the time she reached the corridor that separated Haidari's ward from the recovery unit 2 floors up, she had given them everything he'd given her in order without omission. The captain said, that information is actionable, immediately. Good, she said. Which room is Chung? He blinked. Pardon, Marcus Chung. SEAL Team 6 transferred here yesterday. Which room? Room. He checked his tablet. 214. Thank you. She found 214 without difficulty and knocked once and opened the door without waiting for an answer. Because Marcus would have told her to come in, and waiting was unnecessary. He was sitting up. That was the first thing, not lying down, not inclined at a careful post-trauma angle, sitting fully upright with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been told multiple times to rest and had been ignoring that instruction for approximately 16 of the past 18 hours. His head was bandaged on the right side white against the dark of his hair. He looked tired in the honest way, not the performed way. But his eyes were sharp. "You went in there alone," he said. "I went in there with backup on the audio," she said. "I was never alone." "That's not the same thing." "I know." She sat down in the chair beside the bed. He gave up his handler, name, location, network structure, the whole chain. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Why did he talk?" "I think," she said carefully, "because he'd been used by people who never put themselves in the same danger they put him in. And he'd spent 8 months being Ghost, this mythologized, untouchable thing, and then in one day he got shot by a combat medic who then kept him alive. And the cognitive dissonance of that was larger than his loyalty to the story he'd been told about himself." Marcus looked at her. "That is either the most clinical analysis of a human breaking point I've ever heard, or the most compassionate. It can be both." He was quiet for a long moment. Then 2 clicks, compensate for the wind push. She felt something warm and uncomplicated move through her. "You trained me." "You were already trained," he said. "I just handed you a rifle and got out of your way." He unfolded his arms. "You know what Holt told me this morning? He called me at 0600. They barely let him use the phone for 3 minutes. And the first thing he said was, she checked the round counter before she set up. In the middle of all of that, she checked the counter. Of course I checked the counter." "Of course," he said, "because that's who you are." He looked at her with the same direct, assessing gaze he'd always used, but with something new added to it, something that didn't have a military word but had a human one. Pride, not ownership. Just the genuine, uncomplicated pride of someone who had seen a person become fully themselves and had been present for it. "Your grandfather would have checked the counter too." Her throat did something she wasn't expecting. She held it together with the same discipline she held everything together. "He would have," she said. "Have you slept?" 3 hours. "That's not sleep, that's a pause." He shifted in the bed. "How long are you at Kandahar?" "I fly back to Kestrel this afternoon." "Merritt's folding you formally into the operational structure." "Yes." "Good." He said it simply with no additional texture because Marcus Chung did not editorialize when the facts were sufficient. "When I get back in 6 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks, she said, 6 weeks, we're going to run proper range sessions, documented, structured, and I'm going to start training Torres and Holt on basic precision fundamentals because I should have done that a year ago and I didn't, and this week proved that gaps in team capability kill people." She looked at him. "The doctor says you need to follow protocol." "I follow the protocols that matter." "Which ones are those, the ones that keep people alive?" He met her eyes. "Same as you." She sat with him for 40 minutes. They didn't talk the whole time. There were long stretches of silence that had none of the discomfort of silences between people who don't know each other and none of the forced quality of silences between people performing ease. They were just 2 people who had been through something significant together, sitting in the particular quiet that exists on the other side of a very long day. She told him about the TOC meeting at 700, about Caldwell and the round counter. She told it factually and without editorial, and Marcus listened with his arms crossed and his eyes hard, and when she finished, he said, "Caldwell's going to have a problem with his career in about 6 months. That has nothing to do with you, because men like that eventually step on the wrong thing." He paused. "But I'm glad you knew about the counter." "I always know about the counter," she said. "I know you do." He almost smiled. "That's why I taught you." She left at 1100 to prepare for the afternoon transport. At the door, she stopped without turning around. There was something she needed to say, and she'd been working out how to say it since the helicopter ride in the dark. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah. Thank you, not for the training, for," she found the words, "for seeing me before there was any evidence I deserved to be seen." The silence behind her had weight and texture. "Kira," he said, "there was always evidence. Other people just weren't looking." She walked out. The flight back to FOB Kestrel was different from every other flight she'd taken in country. Same helicopter, same noise, same particulate, heavy air outside the porthole window. But she was different inside it, not larger, not louder, not any of the things that people sometimes became after proving themselves. Just more fully herself, more settled into the specific shape of who she was, the way a person settles after a long period of uncertainty, resolves itself not with an answer, but with action. She thought about the road from Montana to here, the 9-year-old girl lying in the grass learning patience from a man who understood that trust was an act of faith extended before the evidence arrived. The 3 rejections, the kit repacked 100 times, the 3 months of being Doc and not Kira, and overlooked and underestimated and present anyway, learning the team's rhythms and trusting that one day the rhythms would need her in a way that made room for all of her, not just the permitted portion. November 15th, one day, and yet not one day at all. Years of one day, years of preparation for a moment that no one had told her was coming because no one had believed it would. FOB Kestrel came into view. When she walked through the gate, Torres was the first person she saw. He looked at her with the specific expression of someone who had heard things through channels and was waiting to confirm them with his own eyes. He said nothing, just fell into step beside her. Then Holt joined from the left. Then Briggs from nowhere, materializing the way Briggs always did, suddenly present as if he'd always been there. They walked across the compound together, toward the medical bay, toward the next mission, toward the operational reality that did not pause for significance, even when significance occurred inside it. Dawson was at the medical bay entrance. He looked at her when she reached him, read her face the way good officers read faces quickly, completely acting on what he found. Intel's already moving on the information, he said. The handler Haidari gave us, they've got a location lock. 72 hours, maybe less. Good, she said. You did well, Dawson said. Not loudly, not elaborately, just factually the way he said things that were true and didn't need dressing up. I know, she said, not arrogantly, just as a fact of the same order as his. He almost smiled. Almost. Get your kit in order. I want a full medical supply assessment before 1600. Already planned for it, she said. She went inside. Her kit was where she'd left it. Everything in the precise order she maintained, because order was what you fell back on when everything else became chaos, and chaos, in her experience, was always one moment away from any given otherwise normal day. She opened it, began the inventory. Her hands moved through the familiar materials with the efficiency of absolute knowledge, each item placed exactly where it belonged, each gap noted and queued for resupply. Torres came in and started on his own kit at the adjacent table, worked in silence for a few minutes, then said without looking up, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "That morning before the convoy, when I had that feeling." He paused. "And you told me to move my tourniquet." "Yes." "You didn't explain why. You didn't tell me what you were thinking. You just said it, and I did it." He looked up. "How many other things have you said over the past 3 months that I just did because your instincts were better than my conscious reasoning?" She thought about it honestly. "Probably more than you know," she said. "Probably less than I should have said." He shook his head slowly. "Going forward," he said, "you say it, whatever you're thinking, whatever you see that the rest of us aren't seeing, you say it." "Dawson already." "Not because Dawson said so," Torres said, "because I'm asking you to, as your teammate." He held her eyes. "Okay," she looked at him, at the earnestness of it, at the specific courage it took for a person to say, "I have been underusing you, and I want to do better," which was harder than most apologies, because it required admitting the thing before anyone asked you to. "Okay," she said. He went back to his kit. She went back to hers. Outside the base continued its machinery. Generators, rotors, voices, the sound of a place that never stopped. The sound of work. And inside the medical bay at FOB Kestrel, in the particular quiet between calls, Kira Vaughn inventoried her kit with the same steady hands that had steadied a Barrett M82 at 840 meters, and the same steady hands that had placed a chest tube in the man who'd fired back, and she was exactly, completely, entirely who she had always been. She had not become someone new on November 15th. She had simply finally been seen, and she was never going to disappear again.